Our society's leader, Bart Worden, will be speaking today. Bart has been the executive director of the American Ethical Union, the National Federation of Ethical, Culture, and Ethical Humanist Societies, since 2012. Bart is, in addition, a social worker who has worked with programs that help people recover from psychiatric disability. Bart's theme for this year is moral progress, a core element of ethical humanism. His address today is titled Moral Progress, Challenges and Opportunities. Please welcome Bart to the podium.
So in the winter of 1985, I fell in love with ethical culture. It was love at first encounter with the strong and smart elder women I met here, Felicia Goffman, Sylvia Bloom, Maxine Frankenfelder, just to name a few. And what was most refreshing was the emphasis placed on the human initiative and cooperation towards building and sustaining an ethical society. I mean that in the lowercase, lower e, lower s. And a key to the project that they were promoting was and still is the view that moral activity is evolving and the belief that ethical learning is possible and welcome, and that we can join a process of discernment and transformation that will continue to stretch out over many, many generations, all to the benefit of all. And my hopefulness has waxed and waned over the years, often driven by national politics and the responsiveness of the electorate to the cultural tides that drive elections, and especially that drive the selection of political candidates and the voting that candidates got to put them into office. So I guess you can surmise that 2016 was one of those waning opportunities for me in terms of my belief that moral progress was happening. And you'd be correct if you had that impression of me. So, moral progress, I thought that's what we were experiencing for many years prior to that. Not always smoothly and not always in the direction or with the robustness that I would have liked to see. But at least I felt like we were overall heading in a reasonably good direction, right? And that we might even pick up steam with the level of activism I was seeing in 2015, 2016, right? With the Black Lives Matter movement and efforts around climate and other kind of things. I thought, okay, people are getting out there, they're getting engaged, But then the major parties each chose a candidate that was widely hated by the opposition. And the resulting election, I believe, was much more a repudiation than it was an endorsement. And now we're living with the results of that election, which, to my mind, was not a happy thing. So moral progress. The thing is, when you come right down to it, the current administration and its supporters probably believe that what's happening now at the national level, and maybe in some local places too, is moral progress. Let that sink in a little bit. To my mind, the word Trump and morality together is kind of discordant. However, I'll be saying more about this. And by the way, this is the reason why I've been kind of shaking in my boots about this address cycle, because I'll be saying a number of things that probably I wish I hadn't. Or that talking about things that I wish weren't true. Maybe that's even more close to the issue here. But from their perspective, right, the rollback in administrative rules, the choices for Supreme Court judges, rollbacks in taxation, other changes in laws, aren't those considered moral progress from the point of view of the people who are supporting the current administration? So it complicates our efforts to try to tease out whether we're having moral progress or not, because it seems like we don't have agreement about what moral progress truly is. And that's especially problematic for an ethical society, of course, because we're based on the concept of moral progress. That is why we're here. We're an aspirational movement, right? Our efforts are to kind of tease out ethical ideals and to do what we can to inch our way forward toward living those ideals and towards our society living those ideals and realizing the benefits of a world that has a lot more compassion and justice in it, right? That's what we're kind of driving for. And yet it hasn't been very easy, has it? A major reason I wanted to talk about moral progress going forward is my awareness that even when we know what's right, it seems difficult to generate the passion around changing what we do to bring us into that right frame. You know what I'm saying? I know Mike French was here talking about... what was he talking about? I guess plant-based diets or something like that. But what he said was, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is delicious. So for so many of us, I think there are so many aspirations that we have, and yet our lives, it's difficult to live in accordance with them, right? But what puzzles me is also I don't quite sense the passion, the broad passion people might have for doing that, and that's been a puzzle for me. So I go back to it, and I'm trying to figure out now, well, what is morality anyway, right? And how does it work? Where did it come from? And what does it do? What can we do with it? Right? Those are the big questions, certainly. So I've been reading work by Jonathan Haidt. I know I've talked about him before. Anyone here in this room know this name, Jonathan Haidt? Okay, if you know it, you probably hate it. It seems liberals in general seem to be very uncomfortable with what Mr. Haidt has been saying. He's a professor currently at NYU, but he's been other places too. He's a sociologist. And his point of view is that morality is something that is embedded within our cultures, and that it drives us to behave in ways that are good in some ways and problematic in others. And to tease out those basic things is a difficult process. He comes from the point of view that ethics and morality are things that have evolved within human cultures over the course of many, many thousands of years. Which is different, by the way, from many people's sense of morality and ethics, right? I mean, there's been a lion's share of history, I think people have imagined that this is something that has been either brought to us from on high or discovered because it's somehow there's like a moral law that's part of the fabric of the universe kind of thing. And Haidt and other evolutionary folks are saying something different. And what they're saying is, really, it's a computational thing. When you look at groups of people, those groups that are able to cooperate are much more likely to have survivability and the possibility of making more of themselves, basically. And cooperation is not necessarily an easy thing to accomplish. Right? Because we're all pretty self-interested, right? We want to make things work out for us personally, but cooperation can bring challenges to what we do for ourselves personally, right? Think about it in terms of morality. So many things about morality are about catching people transgressing, right? Following things that they want to do or that they think are important to them, but are problematic for the community, right? So just look at that in terms of how it goes. And over the course of many, many years, mechanisms would develop within people to promote behaviors of cooperation and to punish behaviors that work against that, right? So in other words, it's called the Freerider Problem. When you have a group of people working together, a self-interested person could very well look at this and say, they're going to do this anyway, so I'll just go ahead and reap the benefits of what's being produced and not worry about putting myself at risk or, extending any energy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of like many of our people in this country are doing right now. So the morality looks to find cheaters, to find people that are overly aggressive and things along those lines and punish them. and to try to exalt people that are doing helpful things for the community, and in particular doing self-sacrificing things. I think these days about, mention the word military in our country right now, or our soldiers, the people that feel this gratitude towards people who are putting their lives at risk and in foreign lands, and I guess this country too if they're going down to Texas. Anyway, so but this whole sense of kind of appreciating that level of sacrifice that people have. Self-interested person would have a hard time on their own deciding to join the military, right? It'd be much better for them for someone else to do it, right? So, but looking at this kind of in the long picture then, what you have evolving are all of these efforts to kind of help the community cooperate and to ensure that it does. The thing is, communities also compete with each other, right? So one of the other pieces that you get is that morality tends to stick to the people within a collection of group people that feel they know each other and are together, but can become a sign of other as well. And so it can become a situation where you have different groups kind of fighting with each other, competing with each other, and they would have similar basic ideas about, or basic structures for morality, but it may well be that their ideas about what morality entails would be quite different, right? And that's also one of Haidt's main issues, is he thinks that Western culture kind of stands out as an odd duck in the morality world because of their focus on just a couple different areas of ethics. And that most of the world has a very different, less individualistic, more socially oriented, and more traditionally oriented perspective on what it means to live a moral life. And there's a lot of clashing that happens between those two. And it's very difficult for communication to happen across a boundary when you have that situation. So he devotes a lot of time to that. And I'll get to that part in a later address. But in terms of the evolution part, so if you have a set of structures and everything in place to kind of help cooperation happen, you also need something happening within individuals that helps them live within that cooperative environment, right? Actually, one of the things that was really intriguing, they were doing some studies on chimpanzees, right? Trying to figure out if cooperation is so great, maybe other animals do this as well. And certainly you see cooperation, like bees and other kind of, hive animals really do a lot of cooperative effort and self-sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera. But what about chimps? Chimps are pretty smart. And so they started testing them. And what they would find is that chimps are actually pretty good at learning stuff, probably as good as like a 2-year-old in many respects. But they're terrible at cooperating. Terrible at cooperating, and they have a very difficult time learning something from a peer, basically. And so what they would do is they would take kids and they take chimpanzees, and the researchers would go through these different things with them. And so in the one case, they would just let the kids play with stuff, and they would see what they did with it. In other cases, they would show the children what to do with something, and they would show the chimps what to do. And the kids picked it up. They said, oh, I got that now, right? And the chimps just didn't. It was like random whether they tried to follow that or not. And one of the comments was, one thing you never see in the wild are two chimps carrying a log together. Right? Cooperation. And human beings are exceptional cooperators. Right? But that comes at a price, really. Right? You need to have ways to convince yourself that even though you're about to do something that may not work for you personally, it's still a good thing to do. And that's not that easy for an organism to do. So what Haidt is saying is that what we have is kind of a divided mind, and other people are saying this too, right? That there's this intuitive mind that we utilize for most routine kind of tasks, right? You don't have to think about How many people drove here today? Did you take out your map thing and start trying to figure out the pathway here, et cetera, et cetera? Right now, you get in your car and you drive, right? And if anything, you're lucky you don't drive to work by accident because you already have that, in mind, et cetera. But these are the kind of things. There's so much of our life is kind of done from an intuitive kind of level where we've already prepared for it, so we don't have to do it again and think about it and work it all the way through, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have another layer that is much more thoughtful. Right? That is reasoning, that is step-oriented, that will take the time to calculate and do things in an orderly kind of fashion. Right? Well, Haidt says when you look at moral behavior, you're seeing is a subconscious that's about the size of an elephant, and a reasoning self that's about the size of a human being sitting on top of an elephant, right? And if you work with that metaphor, think about controlling an elephant, right? If you're riding an elephant, and the elephant wants to go left or right, you can, I guess, make every effort you can to get that to happen, but chances are very good that the elephant's going to have its way. Right? And sometimes the best thing to do is to kind of try to get some sense about how the elephant's leaning and agree that that's the right thing to do. Right? That's what Haidt is saying morality is really doing. I think there's a character in a children's show, it was some kind of bat. And this is a very clumsy bat, and he's constantly flying around and smacking into things. And then he say, I meant to do that. And this is kind of what Haidt is saying is often happening for us. The thing is, what our intuitive selves believe is important may not be in such great alignment with our ethical values, our reasoning selves. And in particular, what Haidt says research is finding is that what really drives people's decisions around moral behavior is their reputations, right? Not so much whether they are aligning themselves with what is right, but that their reputation within their circle of important people is intact. These drives is kind of like we're kind of the press secretaries for our elephants, right? So whatever we're doing, our tendency is to try to justify it after the fact, right? And that's what we primarily would use our reasoning selves for, is to kind of say, that's the right thing, right? So look at all the major issues that we're talking about today. I know there's an allusion to enslavement. The 400 years is being commemorated right now. There were lots of people that believed they were behaving morally while enslaving other human beings. Right? In fact, they felt like it was their duty, right? Their obligation to do that and to make sure that they controlled the people that were underneath them, the people that they had purchased, and to make that happen. There was a whole moral and legal structure produced to make that possible. And people continually went through all kinds of internal ramifications to justify what they were doing. I recently heard that was it Thomas Jefferson was complaining to people, why are you still buying slaves? It's so much easier to breed them. To breed them. There is a tendency, not just a tendency, this is how we work, is what Haidt is saying. This is how we work. And again, when you have groups that are competing with other groups, they don't see the commonality, they see the difference. Right? So when you have these structures in place, and we have ourselves working in an economy and agreeing that we're doing the right thing, when faced with a challenge to that, it's most likely the challenge, A, will not be heard, or B, if it is heard, will be ignored, Or C, if it is heard and not ignored, will be roundly challenged to protect the initial idea. Challenging stuff, right? This is hard for us. So what do? Right? In other words, in an ethical society, we are kind of living within that same thing, right? We've come together to cooperate, right? Our basic principle, right? Act to elicit the best of others and thereby elicit the best of oneself, right? That's a cooperation call for us, right? And yet, when we start trying to figure out, okay, what is best? Is there really an external measure that we can use to determine that? So we're constantly kind of creating definition of what's best right now, what we hope will be best for the future, those sorts of things. We don't, though, really have a strongly objective moral world, I think, that can help us pull our stuff together in a way that we can say we are definitely secure in what we are doing and where we are headed. And because it's something that is outside of us and big, we expect other people can get there too. We have a much bigger challenge if we have to keep building it from the ground up. And again, moral structures, they can be in some respects compelling and yet still, let me read a quote if I can quick find it. I'm sorry. Try this one on, see how it sounds to you. Our movement rejects the view of, it says man, this is prior to invention of women. Our movement rejects the view of man as an individual standing by himself, self-centered, subject to natural law, which instinctively urges him toward a life of selfish, momentary pleasure. It sees not only the individual, but the nation and the country, individuals and generations bound together by a moral law with common traditions, and a mission which, suppressing the instinct for life closed in on a brief circle of pleasure, builds up a higher life, founded on duty, a life free from the limitations of time and space, in which the individual, by self-sacrifice, the renunciation of self-interest, can achieve that purely spiritual existence in which his value as a man consists. Anyone know who wrote that? His name was Mussolini. Okay, so let's get our minds around the size of the project. Deep breath. So let's get to some good news so I can close out on a happy note. The truth of the matter is, we actually have seen more progress in our culture, right? I mean, as Glenn was saying during the early, the fact that the New York Times put out the 1619 edition, right, really bringing our laundry into the open, that's important, right? Knowing, getting that out, that new voice into our system and hearing it is important. And finding ways to work with that are even more important. The big danger is we hear it and forget it and move on. There's so much to do. And there is stuff we can do. Right? Haidt's most promising statement that I saw was that groups, even small groups, can really evolve emotionally and morally and ethically through the infusion of people who have somewhat different ideas from their own and can challenge them to think things through and consider whether they are on the best path or not. So bringing in different points of view and working with them, listening, working with them, trying to figure out what does this mean for, how the world could be going forward. And then inching our way toward a better future. Anyway, I'll be back to say a few more things in a few weeks, I guess, and kind of build into this next round, which I hope will be also bring a lot more information about, okay, what's the practical ways that we actually move into this kind of behavior. But for today, I guess I'd like us all to be kind of sitting with us a little bit and then see where we're going to go from here. Thank you very much.